Hi, everybody. It's really great to be here. I'm joined today by Gretchen McGowan, the author of Flying In, the book that we're discussing, and I have an article written about below. Thank you for being able to join me. I was really excited to hear about these decades of experience that you have in filmmaking. But what I'd like to start with is something you discuss at the end of the book, where you say people are always saying that independent film is dead and it's never going to be able to come back. But that's not really correct. So I'd be interested in hearing your opinion on the state of independent film now and how that production has changed over the time that you've spent working with it.
Thank you. And it's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me as your guest. Yeah, I do say that in the book, in the course of the book, I probably say it 4 or 5 times. In the course of my life, I've heard it over 100 times that independent film is dead. Find another career, stay in Europe where they appreciate independent film, where they can give you some money to do it, like Hal Hartley made a living there for so long. It's a recurring theme, and it always feels like if it isn't one thing, it's another that is getting in the way of progress for the independent filmmaker. And a lot of filmmakers feel like, just when I graduated, now I fall into a world of disrepair, of recession, or in what's happening right now in the film industry is the great contraction. Because the studios, the networks, the streamers have really pulled back on the amount of production they're doing. So even if something is an indie project, very often they're getting financed by Amazon or by Netflix. So because there are fewer options there are fewer options to get independently financed. It's hard to for financiers to get their money back. It always has been. It's probably harder now if you're not working within the streaming world as part of your financing model. But I know that filmmakers are a tough crowd. They will figure out a way to get their movie made. We just worked with these guys who did the film Pavements, and that like a celebration, almost like a documentary, and a drama. It's sort of like a dedication to the band Pavement, and they just did a really innovative job with it, something the studios would never do. And we're so lucky to have filmmakers like that out there. They sold the movie to Mubi, and it'll get distribution. You'll be able to see that film. So I'm hopeful because I have to be. It's my job to be hopeful, to keep seeking out new filmmakers and to continue to work with new ones as we ride this bumpy roller coaster.
Sometimes it's tragic where I'll go to a film festival and I'll see something that is brilliant and lovely, and then it will just languish sometimes for years looking for distribution, because making a movie and selling a movie are two different things.
Yeah, it's a
But I am
business. We
interested
have
in
to.
like what do you look for when you're trying to decide what a good project would be? What's something that you want to work on, but also something you think will be successful and will be able to sell?
Yeah, when I started working with Jason Cleo and Joanna Vicente at what was then Open City Films and Blow Up Pictures, we had a motto which was surprise us, show us something we haven't seen. Um, so we were really in the market. We were willing to take risks because we were financed, and that was true also at Mark Cuban's company. We were financed. We had the money. The financiers wanted to take risks. They didn't want to be making movies, and we didn't want to be making movies that you were necessarily seeing at the multiplex. They wanted to see the ones that would do really well, perform for the festivals, and get picked up at a festival by a distributor. And back then, we had a lot of great distributors who would take a lot of risks. Now there are a few more that are evolving, and then of course we've got the A24s and the Neons and the movies now. So that's great news for them, which means they're looking for projects like that, just like we are, to produce them. That's part of what gives me optimism is that the risk taking in filmmaking. I think this year's a pretty good indication of how people are telling some wild and wacky stories. Not all of them 100% successful, but I like it as a model for other filmmakers just to push that envelope.
Yes, everybody wants to be dour, but there are some interesting things happening. Because last year we saw the huge billion-dollar projects just flounder hopelessly. Meanwhile, small, strange, out-of-the-way things like Hundreds of Beavers or The People's Joker really managed to come up and get attention. And we also see there was a problem where people like Disney would understand that there's a value to the independent filmmakers, but they would just take them from a small budget picture onto something huge where they wouldn't necessarily have the experience or the gravitas necessary to know that they can push back. But then we also have A24 giving them more mid-budget projects, letting them be experimental without having it be something unwieldy. So I don't know where it's going, but we seem to be in a good, healthy space, at least for me, from my perspective as a viewer.
Good. Yeah, I agree. As a viewer and as a filmmaker, it's a good place to be as far as I don't know, breaking the mold, continuing to break the mold. And I agree to your first point there about an indie filmmaker doesn't necessarily translate and often will not translate well into the studio system. Some of them will, and but one of the other models that has translated, I think, quite nicely and has made viewing streaming projects and television better in recent years is that a lot of the writers and filmmakers from the independent community migrated over to television. And it's a much better living, a much more steady living. And they get some great writing there and they get to take the kind of risks they were taking. If they're given enough time and enough rope, they're able to tell stories that maybe they wouldn't have been able to do as an independent filmmaker.
I'm glad you mentioned that because it's something I have been puzzled by recently. I know that back in the 70s, it was sort of a similar thing, or you'd have these off the wall filmmakers be given TV shows and really let loose to do interesting things. I don't know why that's happened recently. That there's been a bit of a contraction with movies, but TV series are getting more experimental and doing these niche genre things that we haven't seen. Do you have an idea of why that transition is happening?
Well, I think it is part of what I said that it's the independent film mentality and the players themselves migrating over there to make a steady living and being able to take those risks. It's a bit of that. They also see, they tested the waters. They see there's really an appetite for it in streaming, not necessarily on the networks. The networks are going to stick to the blue bloods, the stuff that works time after time, and yet their streaming division, that other arm, is saying, well, we could put that in streaming and see how that works, see if there's an audience for it, and build it out. The hope, though, is all of America going to be streaming enough to be able to do this and get off the traditional television?
And it does seem like we're in a time where those traditions are starting to break down because there's so much coming out on streaming. Sometimes a project will get buried when it comes out and then get canceled, but then a few years later, people will start to discover it and really turn on. It's also difficult to track from the perspective of a journalist because you don't get any of the numbers like ratings or box office numbers for streaming shows. Like I know things are happening and I know they're making decisions, but it's much harder to know how they're making those decisions or what information they're based on.
Right, and you'd like to think that they're smart enough to go on subreddit and check out what the audience is really saying about this and how, because boy are they outspoken, and boy do they feel like cheated when a show ends with a cliffhanger and they decide not to come back for another season.
And there's also this real disconnect, not only with what fans expect, which is egregious. I mean, there are many times I see projects that are obviously a bad idea from the start, but they just keep moving. But also from the way that they're marketed, where there's so much coming out now. Sometimes the first time I will hear about a show that's right up my alley is finding out that it's canceled. Now, I'll know nothing about it. They'll say this thing with lots of promise is gone. And I'll say, what thing? Where did it come from? I guess I'm sad it's gone.
And that makes you all the more curious that you have to check it out, right? Because
Uh,
so many people are up in arms about it.
it's an interesting time. It's both bad and it's good. I see a lot of things that are interesting and weird die out, but at the same time, it's like doing archaeology. You go back even a couple of years where I'll find something that was really interesting. I didn't know about it. There was no buzz, and yet it's exactly what I was looking for. It's kind of tragic because I hope those filmmakers are doing well, but it's fascinating to know that strange genre projects are right out there, not even that difficult to find. It just takes a little bit of looking.
But it is so tricky, to sustain a living as a director who takes risks like that unless you do move over to television. There, as you say, there are so many projects. I'll discover a film 10 years later. I'll watch it and say, "Gosh, where is she now? Why isn't she continuing to make these movies?" Um, Chances are, because of the way this business works, unlike television, that you create the script. The script is great. Everybody loves the script. Everybody wants to make it. You get really close to production, and then something happens. A financier pulls out, and the whole thing disappears. And it takes another 5 years to get the project out of turnaround, to get up the financing and to get the interest in a producer who's going to go the distance. That's hard to watch. In all honesty, I don't have much of a stomach for the long development game, which is why you see and you read in the book that much of what I do is getting closer to when the project's really almost greenlit, or is a project that we already have the financing and we're looking to put it towards something. So let's go. In which case, it's make the thing, but we already know the kind of thing we were looking for.
That brings up something I'm wondering about. Because you have your hands in so many aspects of the process of filmmaking, there are lots of pieces that you need to get in the right place: people, money, objects. By the time something is actually finished, are you able to watch it and get any enjoyment out of it? Or is your head just, oh God, it was so hot that day and the trucks were late, so we had to move as fast as possible and somebody wouldn't come out of their trailer? Or like, can you suspend disbelief?
Yeah, the good ones, you can forget all about that and you can watch it over and over again because you really are transported when it works. And you know a movie really works when you're in the cutting room and you're going to watch down the cut for the umpteenth time and you are excited to do it instead of dreading the idea of losing 2.5 hours of your life of a cut that needs an hour to lose an hour from itself. So I've worked on films where I've had trouble making suggestions for cuts because I love it so much. And yeah, I probably am connected to or I'm hanging on to a scene that has no business being in the movie because of how hard we worked to get that scene. Having worked hard on a scene has nothing to do with it. Nobody cares if you climb Mount Everest to get the shot. So you have to be willing to look at the big picture and know what's important for storytelling purposes, not not hanging on to your the babies you shouldn't be hanging on to. But yeah, no,
Does
I really see. I come from editing, so I like the process of reviewing and refining because I think that editing is just another stage of the storytelling. Right? There's the initial story, there's the script itself, there's the filming of it and how it changes there based on responses from cast and producers and your collaborators. And then there's the editorial process where you have to move stuff around. And what informs me is working in documentaries as well. So when you work in documentaries, you have no idea really what the story is. You have to write something, you have to put together a deck and get greenlit and get your money based upon what you intend to tell. But if you're doing your job right, you you're not doing it by that book. You're recreating it as you go, and you're following the shiny penny, and then the shiny penny turns into a shinier penny, and you get an excellent story at the end of it that no one saw coming and that no one's made before. So that flexibility and being able to kind of shift is something I take into narrative filmmaking too, both in production and in post production.
And it must help a lot coming at it from the perspective of an editor, then working on movies from the front end. Because by the time you're in editing, there's so much to anybody who's interested in getting into filmmaking. You really need to spend time in editing because you learn so much about how much two different cuts, even of the same line or the same scene, can change the tone of it. Does that help in the process of the more front end producing, having it in mind of how structure works when you have everything in the film and you're working on it?
Yeah, when I talk to film schools and people are getting close to graduation and thinking about a way in, oftentimes they're thinking directing, producing, they're thinking about being on set almost more tangibly, I guess. And for me, I say often an easier way in or an easier route in is kind of with the micro. And that is hopefully, assistant editing used to be a lot less technical. You used to be in the room with the editor, it was a creative position. And you were there, and of course, you were fetching stuff and you were running around, but you were learning the true process of editing. Now it's a little trickier because it is so technical. Um, so that's a way in getting into the post production process, and as you say, seeing it from backwards to forwards, seeing a lot of the mistakes that were made on set, and maybe knowing how to save time once you would get on set yourself to avoid those same kind of mistakes. The setup, the double setups, the takes you'd never use, the shots you're never going to use, etc. All sorts of more political stuff than that. Another way in, which is totally not sexy at all, but something I recommend because it's something that I had experience doing when I realized I had no understanding, and that is the accounting end of it, because there is usually a way to train on that and learn. And I say micro because you learn every scrap of bric-a-brac that goes into it, like the books behind you for a character, how to build character with art direction. You learn specifically how many gels were purchased and what lights were used and what kind of camera, how many lenses, what you had to day play. Uh, I love to recommend that people learn that way. I don't necessarily want them to get stuck there, but it's not really about the numbers. It's about learning what truly goes into a film on the micro level.
It's definitely true. The more I've advanced um, in my professional career as a lawyer and my non-professional career, doing film journalism, I've learned to understand that the details and the small tasks that you don't want to do are actually the most important because they build the foundation of everything else you're working with. Um, you may think you can be a good director because you understand how stories work and how stories are told and how to frame a shot. But if you're a really good director, you understand what the costume budget looks like and how to put together a shot list. It takes a lot of tenacity at those small tasks to actually get something made and completed and then out there. If doing it for fun versus doing something functionally, being successful at it and continuing to do it needs an understanding of those details.
Yeah, I mean, I think those two things don't necessarily teach, the accounting and the assistant editing collaboration, but that's sort of that missing link that's hard to teach, right? I like that at many of the film schools their students are holding a boom for their classmate, and on the next one they're going to be, taking care of the costumes or driving everybody to set. So there is like, you learn inadvertently, maybe you don't know it at the time, you learn how to collaborate and how to give up yourself for them on that day, and maybe to be able to make suggestions to help them toward the end of their project. But that art of collaboration, mentioning shot listing, that's absolutely huge, because there are uh, DPs and directors who will kind of withhold that information and not work with the first AD, and bring the three of them really need to be working together, because they have different levels of information leading into the set, and communicating with the crew is absolutely key. To me, it's so everything that keeps a set going, keeps the crew happy, is that communication, and the shot list is where that begins.
It's an interesting time to have this conversation because we're seeing some of those giant budget features where the art is breaking down come from that issue, where they just sort of hand wave, somebody will do the VFX later, but not have the front end communication of what do we actually need, how is this connected to the story. That's how you can have a $300 million project that just looks like garbage because they said we'll shoot it on a green screen and then someone will handle it. As much as we picture filmmaking as being the work of one vision, Quentin Tarantino does not do director of photography work. He has a team of reliable people he uses for all of those other roles, which is why there's a distinctive look and feel to the films that he works on.
And also, it's collaborating is great, and many directors work with the same people over and over and over again. But the real collaborators, to me, the really successful ones, a new editor comes on and they know how to bring them into the fold. Like, they know truly how to work to their strengths, to have studied their what they've done in the past, and to know how to fold that into this new work of art. But I'm not opposed to people working with the same people over and over. It's a successful collaboration should continue, that's for sure. But it's fun to see directors work with new people too, and get enlightened by something that maybe they hadn't occurred to them, and maybe wouldn't have if they stayed with the same director of photography or editor.
And it is something you highlight in the book that I really enjoyed, that I also want people to understand that you can have real fulfilling creative input without being the star of a movie or the director of a movie. There are so many things that you're doing, whether you're the sound editor or the key grip or something involved in lighting or costuming or anything that has a real impact on the product without it necessarily being about or framing you in those couple of very visible roles.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the reasons why I prefer a film with a smaller footprint. Uh, fewer crew, even fewer cast, fewer extras, a smaller building, a smaller world that we are in control of, but also, as you say, where we're collaborating and listening to one another. When it gets so big, when it's the busyness, when the green screen drops, when you are pushing stuff into post instead of managing it in the here and now in front of the camera, um, it just, yeah, it feels less tangible, and it is less personal, I guess. And independent films are personal, and there's a reason why we like to do them. Not to
And you're
say
at an
that a successful film couldn't be created, as I say, in your pajamas at home by yourself. There are going to be some fantastic films, especially with AI coming out, that you will employ that. It's just, this happens to be the way I like to make films.
and it is interesting hearing the discussion about collaboration when what you decided to do a little while ago is write a book, which is involves some collaboration because you have people who edit and give you suggestions, but really it is you focusing putting something down? Was it difficult to make that transition from a big family work to pouring out a lot of your life story, deciding what to cut, and making it this singular work that comes from you and your experiences?
Yeah, it was such an interesting process for me. Of course, I've lived it for so long, these stories, so they've been gestating a long time. I always knew there was something I wanted to do with them. I just wasn't sure that it was, in fact, a book. And when I finally did get to the point, it took a pandemic to get me to get away from people and sit down. And I guess I needed to recreate the people in my head on paper so that I didn't feel so alone during the pandemic. And that's what I did. I put them to paper and reanimated them in this book. Um, and then, at a certain point, like any book and any writer, I suspect, I lost perspective, and I thought, okay, I don't even know what comes where necessarily. Um, and then that was when I counted on a developmental editor who came in and read it. And she's like, "This is great. You need structure. You need to pull this here and try doing this and try this." And it was a lot of what we do in the editing room of try this. Have you thought about this? Try this. So I really responded very well to those suggestions because, again, it was that collaboration that I'm used to, especially almost like being in a cutting room.
And what kind of other skills either translate or didn't translate? Because they're very different mediums, but they are dealing with similar issues of story and pacing, and I'm sure making a lot of cuts.
Yeah, I'll tell you where it was most relevant. In fact, was where I could really draw a direct line between filmmaking and a book, or as an author, was the completion of it with the publisher because it was a brand new experience to me. I'd never published a book before. And of course, that industry is changing too, right? So I had expectations. It was an indie publisher. Um, I think, to some extent, they're like, you need to curb your enthusiasm here because I have great ideas for what I'd like to do and how the audience I'd like to reach and film schools I'd like to go to and all sorts of fun ideas for getting the word out there about the book. But they're like, okay, here's how we do it, and here's the way you kind of have to conform to it. And I said, what is this reminding me of? And then I realized, yes, it's when you sell a film at a festival and there's that wild enthusiasm at the beginning, but then you have to manage your expectations a bit. And if they can't meet it, you need to do it yourself. You need to figure out a way to get the word out there because they have a lot of films, these indie distributors, and they don't have a lot of money. And they might put a certain amount into your film, but they're not going to put the whole pot into your film, even though it was the best thing at Sundance that year.
And it is, I do feel for a lot of filmmakers who are in that space. They're like, I've finally done it. It's real. Except you're not done because then comes the long, arduous work of shopping it around, getting it in theaters. If you want to be independent and maintain control, as some people do, well, that means more effort on you to start communicating with those theaters, as has happened with some of the independent films I've mentioned today. Like, it's good for the creators to have that success, but it's also a second job after making the movie to continue managing it before you get to think about doing something else that's creative.
It is. I feel as though producing, it's so many jobs, isn't it? You have when I work now as head of production at Goldcrest, and we work with producers at the beginning when we're closing the financing. There's a whole hit list of things they need to complete, and I help them do it in order to move forward with getting the money in the bank so they can start filming or continue to prep. And that's almost a different job. They're working with lawyers, they're working with banks, the language is different. excuse me, everything is different from when even the pre-production stage. So you have they have a completely different hat, different job description um, to do that, to close the financing. And oftentimes, another thing I'll recommend is that people partner up, because there will be strengths and weaknesses. I just had lunch with Stacy Smith yesterday, who I produced The Limits of Control with in Spain, with Jim Jarmusch directing, and that was for Focus Features. And she had a relationship with Focus at the time, and she was so good at closing deals on art. Excuse me. She was so great. She was really great follow through on those kinds of things. And I was great at closing the cast deals and doing this and that. So together, that collaboration was great. But, and then we needed each other when it came to all that financing, closing the financing, because that was, that was like three jobs in one. Then the shooting, fine. Everyone's great at getting through filming. And then the post is a different process. Some people have a lot of patience for it. Distribution, completely different process. And whether it's that closing a deal, but the promotion and marketing aspect of it. New job, right? Brand new job. You would, if any other business, you'd hire an entirely different company to do it. But in the indie film world, you're everything.
You think that's something that film schools are good at teaching? Many of the people I've spoken to have said kind of no. Like they're good at teaching you a lot of the aspects of production in the moment, how to work a camera, how to get a crew together, but there are so many aspects of it that are really important that they may not get into, of how do you put a budget together and work with all the people once you've got something that you're ready to show.
Yeah, it's hard for me to say because I'm not there, obviously, on a day to day basis. Some schools are more technical than others, and not just focused on creating the next director or writer. But so yeah, it's fun to go there and to talk about these things too, because you see their eyes wide open. They're open to it, certainly. And yet it's not, as again, it's not the sexiest side of filmmaking, closing that deal. The day on set is the one they've all been thinking about in their head, not necessarily the day they deliver all their legal paperwork to Focus Features. But oh, what a great day it is!
I do want to go in a bit different of a direction just because I wanted to make sure I asked about something while we have some time. So you've worked on many films, you've touched a lot of different projects over the years. Is there anything that you would want to recommend to people that you think they might not be aware of, or might be out of the way? There are hundreds of thousands of films out there. Whenever I talk to a filmmaker, I want to make sure to get their recommendations of things that may have gone unappreciated over time.
When I was working for Mark Cuban, we made 16 films in 3.5 years. And what was so great about that time is, again, we had the financing. We just had to find the right projects. Um, it was surprisingly hard to find really good scripts, but we did. And a few of them just really went underappreciated. I think it was the timing. It was that they didn't have the money behind them in the marketing end of things. One of them is Zoe Cassavetes' Broken English with Parker Posey. Excellent film that we made there. We made a film that Catherine Diekman directed called Diggers. And that's both of those films are the kind you have to watch over and over again. I never grew tired of watching those movies. Hal Hartley made a film there with Parker Posey as well called Faye Grimm. And the last one, which is excellent, it's like a spy thriller that we shot in Berlin and in Budapest. And then another one I'll mention, Brian De Palma shot called Redacted, and that we filmed in Jordan, outside of Amman, in let's see, that was 2008, so, or 2007. So definitely rent those. Put those on your list because they weren't the heavily promoted films, but they're incredibly entertaining.
Make a point to seek those out. It is in sometimes things get buried, but with the state of streaming now and Tubi and Amazon Prime, a lot of those movies are really easy to locate, which is good for me. I hope it's also good for the filmmakers. I don't know how it works on their end, but it is nice that if you want to go back and look, there is a ton there ready to be uncovered.
Yeah, you'd like to think that there is some financial payoff for them anytime it would screen, and there should be. Um, but at the very least, it should be some visibility for their career when they're fighting to close that next deal.
And we're at a point now, you're continuing to work with film. There are lots of people who still want to get into the industry, that lots of things coming out. Where and how do you look out for new projects or new people as there's this huge influx of media and of individuals coming out all the time?
We meet with a lot of filmmakers here at Goldcrest. Goldcrest is a production house here in New York, but we're also a post production facility. So there will be a lot of people finishing a previous project and realize, oh, you do production as well, and we'll take a meeting and kind of discuss what they have on their slate or what they're looking to get going. So oftentimes it will happen there. I meet people. I talk at all the film schools and meet the local film schools, I should say, SVA and NYU and Fierstein, which is a Brooklyn college. More one of those kind of more technical schools, which is excellent, and at Columbia where I used to teach too. So I'm always in touch with the sort of who's coming out of there, and whenever I can hire, and I do hire, uh, researchers and whatnot for mostly for documentaries and production assistants for our upcoming shoots. Oftentimes will come out of those film schools because somebody's come up to me after a guest lecture and they've had sent me their resume afterwards. Uh, Often that will happen, but yes, people will also. We're signatory to the IATSE deal, so a lot of projects will come to us and have the film very close to filming, and say they're closing the gap on some other elements. We're doing a project right now in the UK, and we just need to provide that contract and some oversight of the project too. So we're doing quite a few of those. We were in the international sales business. We still do a bit of that, but we used to do a lot more pre-sales to help finance films like Carol and To Olivia, the Roald Dahl film with Keely Hawes, and that business doesn't exist quite the way it used to any longer because we have the streamers taking worldwide. So there are fewer projects that come to us that way. So we have to get a little bit more innovative, or we need to create our own content, which we do as well.
Do hear a lot of contradictory takes on the way that the international market affects filmmaking and film distribution. So I would just be interested in hearing your thoughts on that. I'm sure it's a factor. I don't know how much of one it is and whether it's one that's changing.
Well, that's a part of that sort of pre-sales that I spoke to, in that the internet, we really did count on international distribution. How well a film could perform in Japan or in Italy. That entirely let us know what our budget was going to be on Jim Jarmusch's film that we shot in Spain. We didn't know until we were getting pretty close to filming what really our budget was going to be, because it was going to be valued by those pre-sales, really, that how well it was, they saw it performing, and then they pay overages later. But that's, they're a filmmaker like Jim can still do that. Todd Haynes, they can still probably do that if they have the right cast often. And yet, So many films are just getting a one-time advance to make the movie, and that's the payment for the movie worldwide rights. That's the climate that has changed. So you have your 4 million, whatever it is, you have to go out, make the movie, deliver the movie, and they own the rights. So you probably won't see anything else unless, as you say, that there are residuals being paid out to SAG, DGA, WGA, or if you have negotiated some sort of deal where you get a back end.
We're about out of time. I want to make sure um, to give you a chance to tell anyone if there's anything that they should be looking out for, whether projects you're working on, ways to follow you. Of course, the book itself, which is out now, and it's very worth reading. I've got a write up associated with this for anyone curious about my thoughts in a little bit more detail on the text itself.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I we we just completed a film that was shortlisted for the Academy Awards called Once Upon a Time in Ukraine, and that hopefully is going to be available. We're working on distribution for that, so hopefully that will be available within the next month or two, and we'll be taking it to some festivals as well. It's about the Ukraine war from the children's perspective. Kids are between 8 and 12, and really incredibly engaging kids. Um, and then we made another film called 64 Days about the 64 days between the election and the insurrection. That's available on Vimeo. It is hard to distribute that film, but maybe we could have another conversation about that, John, at some
Yeah.
point. But yeah, that's been a challenge, but an incredible tracking, like one-stop shopping for what really went down there from the top down. Um, those are the kind of two big docs. Now we have a couple other features that are brewing, and then Post is full of a number of projects, including Severance and a whole bunch of films that are being completed at Goldcrest. So yeah, that's what we have coming. And then of course the book. I'm going to be out in Seattle on a mini tour, and I'll be doing something at Poets and Writers here in New York. I believe with Ed Burns later in the spring, because he has a new novel that's come out. His debut novel has been published.
Great. Well, I'll get links to which of those are I can find quickly, include them with this video and the article. It's been great talking to you. I really enjoyed reading through this book, and I'm going to be making sure to share it with other people I can talk to soon. I know a lot of people interested in the film industry who would benefit from this appreciation of what it's like when you're on set getting all the pieces in place.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.